How to make jalapeños cheddar sourdough bread. Before I will start mixing and preparing dough for this bread, I will do floaters for my sourdough starter to make sure it's ready for baking. So we need to put a little bit of sourdough starter into a little container with water to make sure it floats. On this occasion, sourdough starter was ready for baking. I actually fed it last night or the day before I went to sleep, and in the morning was all ready to bake it. So we will need to add 300 grams of sourdough starter. As I mentioned earlier, is bubbly, is ready to go, and our sourdough starter is basically our yeast we use to make sourdough bread. Then I'm gonna add 300 milliliters or 300 grams of filtered water. Then I'm gonna add 450 grams of white strong bread flour and 50 grams of rye flour. You can use whole wheat flour as well. I think it just gives that a little bit of extra kind of healthiness to our bread instead of just having white strong bread flour. Overall, we need 500 grams of flour, so you can change it if you wanted to, but just by having just a little bit of different flour, I think it makes a nice texture. Then we're gonna add a pinch of salt. You can use a teaspoon as well. And then I'm gonna add golden syrup. Generally speaking, you would need honey, but I didn't have any runny honey, and so I just used golden syrup. So while all these ingredients have been added, I'm just gonna mix them up together in a bowl. And that way we got our sourdough bread dough ready. And the rest of two ingredients, which is pickled jalapenos and grated cheddar cheese, gonna be added later on. So I'm just scraping all the leftover flour from the sides of the bowl, and I'm gonna try to incorporate all the ingredients as well as I can. Don't worry if you don't have a mixer, because it's quite easy to use just by hand mixing it, so you don't have to worry about having mixers and all of that, because I see a lot of people making sourdough bread with mixture. So as you can see, I'm showing you that the sourdough dough is quite sticky. It's quite high hydration dough, which means it has a lot of added liquid. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna close the bowl, or cover the bowl, and we're gonna leave it to rest for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we're gonna start working on the dough, and we're gonna do our first stretch and fold. I've got a cup of water next to me, which I'm gonna use to dip my hands in. It will help me to work with a sticky dough. So what I'm doing is I'm lifting the dough in the air and folding it back towards myself on the top of the rest of the dough. You can do that as little as only a couple of stretches. You can go for as long as you want. When the sourdough start tearing apart, you know that the dough don't have any more elasticity left in it, so we just have to stop and leave it at that. So after a few stretches, I'm covering that up, and I'm gonna leave it to rest for another 30 minutes. And while my dough is resting, I will prepare cheese and jalapenos. All the recipes that I have found online have the cheese diced, basically cut in cubes and add it into a dough. But I've tried a few times to make this bread with grated cheese, and it came out actually really nice. I like that it's smaller pieces of cheese get evenly distributed all across the dough. So now that the cheese is ready, I'm going to move on to preparing sliced jalapenos. Jalapenos I'm using for the recipe is pickled jalapenos I bought from a supermarket, and we only need 60 grams of it. And let me tell you, it's enough to create that nice little spicy kick in the bread, but not to go over the top with the spiciness. I think jalapenos mixed with cheese adds a really nice balance onto sourdough. It goes so well with them. So what I'm doing is I'm slicing my jalapenos into smaller pieces before I add to a dough. Again, you don't have to do this, but I think I'd rather not eat the bread and have a big chunk of jalapenos. Again, we can evenly distribute it and have that little jalapenos on every bit of bread rather than just big chunks on one side or the other. Now I'm going to start working on the dough. So after 30 minutes of rest, I'm going to do the last of stretch and fold. I've got a little cup of water on the side, and helps me to work with this sticky dough. I'm not doing too many stretches, just more to get the air out. And now I'm going to add sliced jalapenos. Try to add one by one ingredient, because again, you kind of want to work with that dough. So my jalapenos will go first, and I'm just again going to do a few stretches and folds, trying to incorporate as best as I can these delicious spicy little jalapenos into the dough. You can get the dough out of the bowl and just knead on a worktop, but I find it's just more tidy to keep everything in a bowl. If you don't have a big bowl, again, you can just do that on a worktop. There's no problem at all. So jalapenos have been added, and now on to the next and last ingredient, which is cheddar cheese. My grated cheddar cheese, I'm gonna add that into kind of two sections. So first I'm gonna add a little bit, and I'm gonna incorporate. I feel like if you add the whole cheese straight away, it just happens to be like kind of much harder to work on. But I think if you add a little bit and then you can add a little bit more, it's just easier to push that cheese into the actual bread. I'm gonna go ahead and add the last batch of grated cheese into the dough, do a little bit more kneading, and that will be my last ingredient to add. By now, all the ingredients are incorporated, and I'm just gonna do kneading, and I'm not using any particular technique. It's just me kind of trying to push that cheese into the dough with the rest of the ingredients. I'm kind of doing stretching and folding. I'm kind of moving the dough around. It's very sticky. It's not very easy to work. And the thing with the sticky sourdoughs is that it's quite hard to kind of make that final shape, and but the dough is coming nicely into a little bowl. How are you gonna do it? It's not a big deal. It's a bulk. We're preparing this dough now for bulk fermentation, and bulk fermentation is gonna be this long period of time when the dough gonna be resting, and we want to see this dough double in size and create this nice bubbly texture. So I'm gonna cover this dough up and leave it to rest. You can do that overnight, you can leave it in the fridge, you can leave it on the worktop, it really doesn't matter, but we will need about 6 to 8 hours. So now that our sourdough was resting and proving for 6 to 8 hours or overnight, we can see that the dough is actually almost doubled in size. It's quite relaxed and it has some nice, like a stringy texture inside. It's much easier to work. As you can see, it's definitely have more elasticity and it's just so much easier to work. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to do a few more stretch and fold. I want to get rid of as much air as I can that was created inside the dough during bulk fermentation. I'm gonna go ahead and flour the worktop and I'm gonna get this dough out of the bowl and I'm gonna start creating final shape for this sourdough bread. Now that the dough has been shaped, I'm gonna move my dough into the pan that I will bake my bread. I'm using a sandwich bread pan. You can use any shape you want. Sometimes I use Benetton basket, but I sometimes have trouble using it, so I just thought I'll just make a sandwich shape loaf, which is easier to use as well because you can nicely cut it and make sandwiches. So what I do is I get a sheet of baking paper, run under a little bit of water, and then kind of squeeze it on my hand, and then it's easier to shape around the pan. So now that it's all ready, I'm gonna transfer my dough into the pan. It's an evening and I'm not going to be baking this bread right now because I need to do a second proving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this dough in the fridge, but in order not to get it dry on the top, I'm going to cover it with the cling film. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of oil to make sure that while the dough is raising overnight in the fridge, it wouldn't stick to the cling film. So all side of the cling film will go the same side as the dough. Now that it's all ready, I'm gonna be placing this in the fridge and will be there for overnight. Baking bread straight out of the fridge creates that nice extra volume in the final bread loaf. Now we're gonna go ahead and actually bake the bread. So I'm gonna add some cold water on the bottom tray of my oven, and I'm gonna set the temperature to start preheating the oven before I put the bread in. I'm gonna remove the cling film, and as you can see, the bread has gone up in the volume, but it's not that much, but that's all right. It's actually better to bake most of sourdough breads straight out of the fridge because of extra volume. It gets kind of gets that in the heat, it's just kind of shoots out of the pan. It's really good. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna score the bread. I'm not the greatest scorer when it comes to sourdough, but so you will need this tool that has got a little blade, and we're gonna cut the side of the bread in a 45-degree angle. It's much easier to score the bread dough when it comes straight out of the fridge because it's a little bit cold and a little bit harder. I start by obviously flouring the top first. It just makes it easier to cut it. It didn't seem like it was that easy to cut that day, so what I've done after I've done the initial scores in the dough, I went ahead and went over the scored scars again just to make them a little bit deeper. Scoring bread not only makes it look kind of nice and creates that unique sourdough look, but it also helps the dough to escape that extra heat. So it has a few different functions. My oven was a little bit preheated, and now I'm gonna place the bread in the oven and I'm gonna bake for 30 minutes at first. And I've got temperature, all the details on the screen for you to help. I also got a blog post which I'm gonna link below. And then after baking in total for 45 minutes, the bread is out of the oven. It looks so beautiful. We have that nice scoring where the bread was trying almost to escape. I can see little jalapenos. It looks really beautiful. But before we start cutting the bread, we're gonna let the bread cool down. Cutting bread too early will mush inside and it's just not gonna look that nice. I always find that the sourdough bread tastes better the next day. It's as if it needs a proper dry out. And don't forget that this dough was quite high hydration, had lots of liquid added into it, including a huge amount of sourdough starter. So now that my bread has cooled down, I'm gonna cut it and I want to show you how this bread looks inside. As I said earlier, I chose to make this bread in the shape of sandwich loaf, and it looks really good. That way I can use this bread to make sandwiches, if I want to spread anything on the top, a butter or hummus, anything that you like. As you can see, it has a lot of sponginess in it, and it's really soft. I wish I could share with you how delicious this bread is, but you can easily make your own jalapenos and cheddar sourdough. As you can see, I don't have a big chunks or really big holes, but that's all right. I don't mind because, like I said, I like to use the bread to make sandwiches and everything else, so not having huge holes in the bread actually makes it a little bit more practical. Well, I hope you found this tutorial really helpful because the bread is amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite sourdoughs I've ever made. And I happen to have loads of people to tried it and they said it's actually really delicious.